The voice note arrived at 11:58 p.m. I know the exact time because I checked it 3 times afterward, the way you keep checking a bruise to see if it's gotten worse. 11:58, 58 seconds long, a timestamp and a duration that had no business being as important as they turned out to be. I had been awake anyway. I work in municipal planning, which is a job that sounds impressive at dinner parties and means almost nothing after 10 at night, and I'd been on my couch finishing a site assessment due to my supervisor by 7 the next morning. My laptop was open. My third cup of tea was cold. The CN Tower was doing what it always does out my kitchen window, just standing there being aggressively useful as a landmark. Standard Tuesday in Toronto. My name is Duncan Reeves. I'm 31. And Corinna Marsh had been my closest friend for going on 7 years. We met at a Welcome Week event at U of T, the kind of forced social gathering designed to make new students feel connected and mostly makes everyone want to go home. I was standing near the snack table because it gave me somewhere to put my hands. Corinna walked up beside me, picked up a cookie, looked at it for a long moment and said, "This is technically a disc." I said it was a shortbread. She said discs were not food. We talked for 40 minutes and missed the actual icebreaker. She studied nursing. I studied urban planning, which she described for the rest of our undergrad as professional arguing about sidewalks. She wasn't wrong. We became the kind of friends that happen slowly and then suddenly are the most essential thing you have. Study sessions became coffee runs. Coffee runs became Sunday morning farmers market trips in Kensington. Farmers market trips became the annual October thing, where the maple syrup vendors came in from outside the city, and Corinna would buy 3 jars she didn't need and justify it through autumn somehow. I knew her order at every coffee shop within a 15-minute walk of her apartment. She knew which of my colleagues I found exhausting and in what specific ways. She had a key to my place because I locked myself out in January 2022, and she lived 12 minutes away, and neither of us ever remembered to ask for it back. She worked as a nurse practitioner at a walk-in clinic in Kensington Market. She treated people who were sick and scared and sometimes came in alone at 3 in the afternoon because they didn't know what else to do. I processed zoning applications. She spent years telling me I managed the geometry of human lives without ever actually touching them. She also wasn't wrong about that. There was a reason we had stayed friends for 7 years without ever naming what I thought. We had both started to feel somewhere around year 4. His name was Cliff, a guy she'd been with for 2 years before he accepted a job in Calgary and told her 3 weeks before he left. She didn't fall apart dramatically. That wasn't Corinna. She just got quieter for a while, more careful, like she was rearranging furniture inside herself and didn't want anyone to see the process. I decided that year that whatever I was feeling needed to stay where it was. Not because I didn't trust it. Because she needed steady, not complicated. I was good at steady. I'd had enough practice. By the time she was okay again, really okay, not performing okay, the habit of not saying anything had become so normal, I'd stopped noticing I was doing it. Other people noticed for us. My mother, who had met Corinna at a family dinner 3 years back, once watched her reorganize my spice cabinet without asking, and then hand me back my own nutmeg like she was returning library property, and said quietly, while Corinna was still in the kitchen, "Are you going to do something about that? Or is the plan to watch her alphabetize your entire life from a respectful distance?" I changed the subject. Corinna came back with the nutmeg in alphabetical order and offered me a look of pure professional satisfaction. We both let it go. That was, essentially, our whole thing. Let it go. Keep it where it lived, which was somewhere between best friend and the person I compare everyone else to by the second date. The night the voice note arrived, I was only half paying attention to my phone. I heard it buzz. I looked over. Corinna's name on the screen, a microphone icon instead of a text bubble. That happened sometimes. She had a long commute home from the clinic. On nights she covered a late shift, and she'd record voice notes instead of typing when she was on the subway or walking. I pulled out my earbuds, tapped play, and went back to staring at my site assessment. Her voice came through on speaker. "Okay, so I'm going to need you to process this with me because I am losing my mind a little bit." She was walking. I could hear the October wind through the audio, the faint sound of Bloor Street traffic, Her shoes on pavement. She sounded the way she sounded when she was trying to be casual about something that was bothering her, which meant each word was slightly more careful than it needed to be. The dinner was fine. Boyd's speech was very Boyd, which is to say 4 minutes too long and somehow about supply chain logistics. He works in procurement, I don't know. Lena looked incredible. The food was genuinely good, which I wasn't expecting because you know how I feel about hotel restaurants. I knew exactly how she felt about hotel restaurants. But then Boyd's aunt sat next to me, and she spent literally 15 minutes asking about Duncan. Not asking how I knew him, asking when we were getting together. When I said we were just close friends, she looked at me like I'd told her the earth was flat. And then, and this is the part I need you to hear, she said, "Sweetheart, everyone at this table assumed you were together before you even walked in. And I just—" She stopped. The wind picked up on the audio. I had stopped moving. My hands were still on the keyboard. I hadn't typed anything. I don't know what to do with the fact that I think about him constantly. And it's not I know what it is, I've known for a while, but knowing it and doing anything about it are two completely different provinces. And the thing is, if I say something and it goes sideways, I lose the person who keeps me. She made a small, frustrated sound. I've been in love with him for 3 years, and every time I try to imagine my life actually going the way I want it to, he's just there, already there. Like he built himself into the blueprint, and I didn't notice until it was load-bearing. The voice note ended. 58 seconds. I sat very still with my hand over my mouth and my sight assessment glowing pointlessly in front of me. The notification bar showed the chat thread. It was the direct conversation between me and Corinna. Not Harriet, not anyone else, me. She had sent it to me. My first thought was, she doesn't know yet. My second thought was that I had approximately 30 seconds to decide who I was going to be about this. I could pretend I hadn't heard it, send back a thumbs up or a sounds like a night, and let her believe it went to the right person. She'd figure it out eventually, when the real Harriet didn't respond. Or when the thread timestamp told her, and then she'd spend weeks trying to figure out if I'd heard it. And I'd spend weeks pretending I hadn't, and we'd build a very elaborate new layer of not saying anything on top of the one we already had. I looked at the voice note timestamp again, 58 seconds, 3 years. I wrote her a message. I stared at it for a while, then I sent it. I think that was meant for Harriet. I heard it. All of it. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Can we talk tomorrow? The typing indicator appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again, then nothing for 11 minutes. Then, how much did you hear? Not a question mark, a period, the kind of punctuation that means you already know the answer. All of it, I wrote back. You should know that before tomorrow so you're not walking in blind. She didn't reply after that. I didn't expect her to. I finished my sight assessment on autopilot and went to bed and did not sleep well, and woke up feeling like a person who had crossed some invisible border and left his passport behind. We met at Ideal Coffee on Harvard Street at 10:30 the next morning. I told my supervisor I had a dentist appointment. He believed me because I had never once taken a personal day in 2.5 years, and I think he was, honestly, slightly relieved to have evidence I was a biological organism. Corinna was already there when I arrived. She had her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug and was looking out the window at the street with the particular expression of someone doing arithmetic in their head and not loving the numbers. Her hair was down. She was still in her coat, the dark green one she'd had since our final year at U of T. She had not ordered me anything, which meant she wasn't sure if this was the kind of conversation that allowed for coffee to be normal. I sat down across from her. The small table between us felt both completely ordinary and like a fairly significant object. "Hi," she said. "Hi." Neither of us reached for the menu printed on the little chalkboard between us. Neither of us pretended to look at it. "So," she said. "So." She wrapped her hands tighter around her mug. "How bad is this?" "It's not bad," I said. "It's just honest, which is scarier." She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's an unfair way to put it." "Probably." She looked down. Then, "I didn't know it went to you." I was walking home from the subway. I thought I was sending it to Harriet. I didn't look at the thread. I just, Corinna. She stopped. I know, I said. I know it was an accident. That's not the part I want to talk about. Her jaw shifted slightly. She was doing the thing she did when she was trying not to show she was nervous, going very still, like stillness might make her invisible. A clinician's habit, I'd always thought. The body learning to hold itself steady when patients needed steady from you. What part do you want to talk about? She said. Still not questions. Just sentences wearing the shape of sentences. I leaned forward slightly. You said 3 years. Her eyes closed briefly. Yes. That's a specific number. I'm a medical professional. I understand time. I almost smiled. It almost worked. Not quite. Why didn't you say anything? I asked. It came out softer than I intended, which was probably more honest than if it had come out the way I'd rehearsed it in the shower that morning. She looked at the table, at the steam rising off her mug, at the street, then at me. Because you were the thing I wasn't willing to risk losing, she said. And I know that sounds like something people say. I know it's practically a cliché. But I've watched what happens when you name something and it doesn't survive the naming. And you are the person I text when a shift goes wrong. You're the person who drove me to the ER that time I thought I was having a cardiac event and it turned out to be a panic attack, and you didn't make me feel ridiculous for either possibility. You know I hate August heat, but I love August evenings, and that those are two completely different things. She stopped, swallowed. If I said something and you didn't feel the same way, I'd lose all of it. And I decided a long time ago that keeping quiet was cheaper. I held her gaze. Outside, the street was doing its ordinary morning things. A woman walking a dog, a cyclist in a fluorescent jacket, the steady ambient sound of a city that didn't know or care what was happening inside this specific coffee shop. Here's the thing, I said. When you left that relationship, after Cliff, I made a decision too. I decided you needed steady, not complicated. That was the right call, I think, at the time. But somewhere between then and now, the decision that was supposed to be temporary turned into a habit, and I kept the habit way past when it was actually useful. She was very still. How long? She said. I considered saying a while, or I don't know exactly, or something that would let me off the hook. But she had just told me 3 years over a voice note she hadn't meant to send me, and the least I could do was match her honesty. Longer than 3 years, I said. I stopped counting because counting felt dangerous. Corinna looked at me for a long moment. I watched something in her face shift, not dramatically, just a small recalibration, a muscle near her jaw that had been tight going loose. You are the most frustrating person I have ever met, she said. I've been told I manage geometry from a distance. That's about sidewalks. The principal transfers. She pressed her lips together. Then she laughed, short and real and a little broken, the kind that comes out when you've been holding your breath for a long time and finally let go. The tension in my chest went somewhere less sharp. Okay, she said, so, what do we do with this? I don't know, I said, but I know I don't want to spend another year pretending the blueprint comment didn't do something to me. I didn't think you'd heard that part. I heard all of it, including the load-bearing. She covered her face with both hands briefly. I talk when I'm stressed. I've always talked when I'm stressed, you know this. I do, I said. It's one of my favorite things about you. I just normally get to hear it in real time. She lowered her hands, looked at me across the small table. Are we doing this, she said, or are we going to be careful about it? I think we can do both, carefully. That's the most urban planner sentence you've ever said to me. I'm working with what I have. She reached across and set her hand flat on the table between us, not reaching for mine, just placing it there, an offering, a question that didn't need to be asked out loud. I turned my hand over and covered hers. That was it, that simple, that enormous. Boyd and Lena's wedding was 3 Saturdays later, the first weekend of November at a restored Heritage Hall in the Distillery District, the kind of venue that costs an amount of money that makes you briefly question your career choices. And then remember, you went into public service because you actually care about zoning. Corinna had invited me 2 weeks before the voice note, as her plus one. Because Boyd will spend the entire night trying to get us into a conversation about transit infrastructure, she'd said, and I need backup. We had both treated this like a normal thing, which said everything about how good we had gotten at treating things like normal things. I picked her up at her apartment on Palmerston at 5:15. She opened the door in a burgundy dress I had never seen before. Her hair done differently than usual, and said nothing for one full second before saying, "You're wearing the gray jacket. You told me the gray jacket was good. I told you it made you look like you had your life together. Isn't that good?" "It's dangerous," she said, and stepped back to let me in while she got her coat. Harriet appeared in the hallway behind her with a glass of wine and the expression of a woman who had been waiting for a specific episode to air and had finally seen the thumbnail update. She pointed at me, then at Corinna, then back at me. "No commentary tonight," Corinna said. "I mean it." "I'm just standing here," Harriet said, innocently, with wine, in my own home. "You have never done anything innocently in your life." Harriet looked at me with the quiet confidence of someone who holds all the receipts. "She's nervous," she said. "In case you were wondering." I was not wondering. I had also straightened my jacket for 7 minutes before leaving my apartment and did not mention this. The wedding was beautiful in the way November weddings in Toronto are when they commit fully to the season. Dark wood, warm candlelight, tall windows, looking out on brick and early frost on cobblestones. Boyd cried during the vows, which was both expected and somehow exactly right. Lena looked like she had been waiting her whole adult life to find something worth dressing like that for. Within 20 minutes, 3 different people assumed Corinna and I were together. Corinna corrected the first one and then stopped correcting the others. I noticed this. I did not mention it. Instead, I handed her a glass of wine during cocktail hour, and she took it without looking, and then looked, and something passed between us that we both filed for later. By dinner, her shoulder had found the natural angle of leaning toward mine at the table. By the first toast, our chairs had migrated 3 inches closer than where they'd started. Not dramatically, just gravitationally. When dancing started, she looked at the floor and then at me. "You're going to tell me you don't dance," she said. I didn't say anything. "You had the posture of a man forming an excuse." "I don't dance particularly well," I admitted. "You think I'm asking you to be good at it?" We danced. Not well technically, but together, which turned out to be the only thing that mattered. Her hand on my shoulder, mine at her waist, the specific difficulty of being this close to a person you had been carefully not being too close to for several years. Near the end of a slower song, she tilted her head up slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "You don't usually ask permission." "This one I'm asking permission for." Something in my chest went quiet. "Go ahead." When I said load-bearing, she said, voice low enough that only I could hear it. "Did that scare you?" I thought about it honestly, the voice note landing, sitting on the edge of my couch with my sight assessment glowing, understanding I was at some kind of border I hadn't marked on any map. "Not the way I expected it to," I said. "What way did you expect?" "I expected it to feel like a problem that needed solving, something to manage." I let that sit for a moment. It didn't feel like that. What did it feel like? Like something I'd been trying to argue myself out of for long enough that hearing it from you out loud was just, I found the word, relief. Her breath changed, a small contained thing. 3 years, she said softly. That's how long I've been having that argument with myself. You win the argument, I said. I think it was a loss from the beginning. She looked down at my jacket collar. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright in the way that was close to tears, but wasn't quite. "I'm scared," she said. "I know. You can't know all of it. Tell me the part I don't know." She held my gaze. Around us, other couples turned slowly. Someone near the bar was laughing too loudly at their own joke. The November dark pressed against the tall windows. "I'm scared," she said carefully, "that if this changes and it doesn't work, I lose the person who showed up when I thought I was having a heart attack and didn't make a single joke about it until I asked him to. I lose the person who bought me 3 pairs of wool socks when I was doing a clinical placement in Sudbury because he knew the hospital was cold and didn't mention he'd done it for months. She swallowed. I'm scared I'll want the version of us that was safe and won't be able to find my way back to it. There it was, not fear of feeling, fear of losing what we already had. I'm scared of that too, I said. I want you to know that. I'm not standing here thinking this is easy or that 7 years of friendship is something you can just put on the table without holding your breath. She nodded. But I think not naming it has started costing us something, I said. And I'm not sure the version of this we've been protecting is as intact as we think it is. She was quiet for a moment. The song was almost over. Say that last part again, she said. We've been trying to protect something by not touching it, I said. I think we've still been touching it. We've just been doing it in the dark. Corinna let out a slow breath. Her hand moved slightly on my shoulder. The song ended, and neither of us stepped back. I don't want to do it in the dark anymore, she said. Neither do I. A small smile found its way onto her face. Not her default one, not the quick, deflecting one. The careful one she kept for things she actually meant. Okay, she said. Okay. We slipped out through the side exit near the end of the reception, into the narrow courtyard strung with lights between old brick walls. The November air was sharp and cold in the specific Toronto way that gets into your collar and reminds you that you are in fact made of something physical. She pulled her coat tighter. I had left mine inside. You're going to freeze, she said. I'm fine. You are visibly not fine. I grew up in Winnipeg. This is nothing. You grew up in Winnipeg until age 6 and then moved to Mississauga and have complained about Toronto winters every year since we met. I've heard this story. The principle stands. She looked at me through the cold air, and something in her face went softer than the sharpness of the evening. Then she stepped toward me and kissed me. Not impulsively. There was nothing impulsive about Corinna, even when she was brave. It was deliberate. A choice made clearly. Her hand came up to the side of my jaw, and the cold courtyard disappeared entirely. When we pulled back, her forehead was close to mine. Her eyes stayed closed for a moment. Then she opened them. I've been thinking about doing that for 3 years, she said. Was it worth the wait? She considered this with mock seriousness, jury still deliberating. I laughed and she laughed, and then the side door opened and Harriet walked out with 2 champagne flutes and stopped dead. Oh, she said. Corinna closed her eyes. Harriet. I was just getting some air, Harriet said, in the tone of a woman who was absolutely not just getting some air. You followed us out. I noticed you had left and became interested in your well-being. I put my hand over my face. Corinna looked at me. I looked at her. We both independently started laughing. Harriet held out the champagne flutes with the reverence of someone presenting sacred objects. I have been waiting for this for 4 years, she said. I deserve these glasses at minimum. Corinna took one. I took the other. You're not getting a toast, Corinna told her. I'm getting a toast. Harriet. Fine, Harriet said, lifting her invisible glass. I'll toast myself, to me, the only person in this friendship who was paying attention. She deserved it. She had genuinely earned it. The morning after the wedding, I showed up at Corinna's apartment with coffee from the place on College Street she'd mentioned twice back in September. A flat white for her, black coffee for me, because I am, she has told me, aggressively simple about coffee. She opened the door in her housecoat with her hair genuinely in chaos and looked at the cups. You remembered the cafe, she said. I remember most things you say. You've known this. She looked at me for a moment with something open on her face. Then she stepped back to let me in. We sat on her couch that morning with our knees occasionally touching under an old blanket, the radiator making its small reliable sounds, and talked, actually talked, without the performance of not talking about what we wanted. Not in sweeping terms, in specific ones. That we weren't going to blow past 7 years of friendship to get somewhere faster. That we weren't going to treat the voice note as a mandate to become different people overnight. That we were going to be who we already were, just without the habit of looking away at the parts that mattered most. Harriet came out of her room at 10, saw us on the couch, and said, "Good, you're still here," to me, with the satisfaction of someone closing a very long file. 3 months later, Corinna came to Sunday dinner at my parents' place in Etobicoke. My mother, who had been waiting for this exact moment since approximately the nutmeg incident, looked at Corinna across the kitchen table and said, "Finally." Corinna pointed at her. "That is not a greeting. It is when you've earned it," my mother said, and meant it as the warmest thing she knew how to say. Harriet sent a card to the two most oblivious people I've ever loved. Signed, your unpaid emotional consultant. A year after the voice note, we signed a lease together on a 2-bedroom on Euclid Avenue. Not because it was dramatic, because Corinna had noticed one afternoon that 3 of her houseplants were on my windowsill, and her jacket was on my doorhook, and her running shoes were by my entrance, and her name was already on my grocery app for shared lists. She looked around my apartment and said, "This is inefficient. We're paying double rent to live in the same place." I said, "Are you asking me to move in with you or submitting a resource allocation proposal?" She said, "Both." I said yes to both. 2 years after that, at a small dinner at my parents' house, I asked her in the kitchen while she was reaching for a serving spoon. She turned around with the spoon still in her hand and said yes before I finished the sentence. From the other room, my mother said, "I heard that," with the tone of someone who had known the answer for years. We got married the following September. No accidental voice notes, no overheard conversations, just two people who had spent a long time being afraid of exactly the right thing and finally decided the cost of the fear was higher than the cost of saying it out loud. Harriet was the maid of honor. Her speech was 3 minutes long and included the phrase structurally reckless emotional negligence and got the loudest laugh of the evening. She earned every second of it. On the way out at the end of the night, Corinna took my hand on the steps outside the venue and said quietly, into the September dark, "That voice note was the most useful mistake I ever made." I thought about 58 seconds, 3 years. The coffee shop on Harvard Street, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, the careful stillness of a person trying not to be seen being nervous. "Yeah," I said, "same." She leaned into my shoulder and the city kept moving the way cities do. Indifferent, continuous, entirely unbothered, and we walked out into it together, which is the only way worth going. What would you have done if your best friend accidentally sent you a voice note meant for someone else? And what she said changed everything you thought you knew. Have you ever found out someone loved you in a way that was never meant to reach you? Tell me your story in the comments. If this one stayed with you, leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.